All right. Welcome, everybody. We are back with another chain chatter where we talk about all things cross chain. Uh, I'm excited about this one because Kenton and I have been talking about bonding and all the things on Twitter, and it's nice to finally get to meet you over video and chat about a lot of questions that I think not only I've had, but I've seen a lot of other people have. And despite being in this space for a really long time, in terms of Thorchain, I didn't bond until very recently. And I know we talked a little bit about that, pre-show. So I'm excited today to kind of dive into some of those things and some of the, I think, more basic questions that a lot of people, from the outside looking in might have when it comes to bonding, and then also with TCY on the horizon. So, first of all, how are you doing? And how's everything been going on the bonding front for you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, man. Nice. Likewise. Nice to meet you too. I think bonding's been going great. I've gotten a few new nodes going. Everybody else has. The network overall is growing. I think right now we're pretty close to the all-time high number of nodes and all-time high amount of rune bonded, which is fantastic. I mean, Thorchain's been through some hiccups the last few months. The crypto market in general is in the toilet. It's like bear market again. So when when you have strong metrics like that and in a bad market, that's really positive. And it's not just recycling the same kind of people. We're getting people who've never bonded before. We're getting people who are averaging down, buying more rune while it's cheap. Getting people who are pulling rune off Binance for the first time. We're getting brand new node operators. Guys have never run a node before. They're jumping in. So that's what we truly want, right? To get all those different people, different actors coming in. So I think it's been going great. It's been fantastic.
That's awesome. And I've definitely been seeing a lot of that, and just general activity around bonding on X has been growing, and the information out there has been as well. To take a little bit of a step back, how did you originally find Thorchain, and what kind of drew you in to this space specifically?
Yeah. So I didn't really get into Thorchain until beginning of 21, end of 2020. Basically, when Bitcoin is breaking out, I bought a basket of DeFi, and then I started looking into it. And but I started with all the Ethereum stuff, right? Those at the time, that was those are the big DeFi protocols, and Thorchain was kind of at the bottom of my list. And then I started looking into it, and I'm like more looking into it, like deep diving. And I'm like, holy smokes, this is huge. This is amazing. This is solving a huge problem. Layer 1 swaps, self-custody. The token has value. It actually has intrinsic utility in the protocol. And I'm like, oh my God, this is checking off so many boxes. And so I just fell down the rabbit hole. And then at the time I was I used to work for a firm specialized in a TradFi firm, Sprott. You specialize in precious metals and mining stocks, and so I was managing money in that arena, and they had no interest in getting into crypto, and I've been bugging them for years because the whole gold narrative is the same to the Bitcoin narrative, right? Hard money and all that good stuff. So I've been getting clients into it over the years, but I'm like, I really want to focus on it. So I left that firm, start my own asset management company to specialize in crypto and basically help people get into crypto, right? Like the next, where that S curve adoption, the next 80% wave of people coming to crypto, they need their hands held. And so I wanted to fill that void, right? Help people. And so I have my own asset management company specializing in crypto. I'm going to launch my first fund. What I want to do to be different, I don't want to have a fund full of like 20 or 30 different positions, venture capital fund, buying all these illiquid private sales, SAFT kind of tokens. I didn't want to do like an algorithmic leverage trading program. And so I wanted to do something different, but what? And through that whole time, I'm getting more and more into Thorchain. And I'm like, I know what I'll do. I'll start a fund to focus on Rune, buy Rune, and run nodes on Thorchain. And so my fund is a pure play on Rune, pure play on running nodes. And I've been doing that now for almost 2 years. The fund's been live. And then I'm also helping people bond provide directly with nodes too now.
That's awesome. And I think it's a unique opportunity to ask you, how do people perceive, Rune and Thorchain broadly when you talk to them? Because it sounds like you're obviously talking to people IRL about, investing in Thorchain and Rune. What's their reception of it, and what are their kind of initial impressions? And are they a little bit resistant to the idea, or do they, are they fascinated by it and just want to jump in?
So, like, if I'm talking to like a normie, like somebody who's like
new to crypto, or may not be, either new to crypto or like maybe in Bitcoin, but like doesn't touch, the altcoin market. Yeah, exactly.
Hasn't branched out. Yeah. So, and I have talked to those. I go to meet up with a bunch of Bitcoin maxis, and they, so for the normie, for the people new to crypto, they're just scared of crypto in general, right? And it's not about any particular token. They're even still scared of Bitcoin. I think that's lessening much more so now with the U.S. and Trump being pro crypto and the strategic reserve. Like, I think people are finally coming around that Bitcoin is okay. It's still speculative, it's still risky, but they're definitely more comfortable with it. As far as the rest of crypto, they're still pretty scared. But when I walk through what Thorchain is, what the token is, it's not a meme coin. It has utility. It's an exchange, right? People can understand, oh, it's Coinbase, Binance, right? They understand exchanges, right? Like a stock exchange, right? So they can start connecting things they already know and understand to Thorchain, right? And so that's my job as a salesman, promoter, trying to raise money, whatever you want to call it, is to help people bridge that gap. Like, listen, Thorchain really isn't that different from what you're used to in TradFi. And when I start, making the comparisons and whatnot, it starts clicking. They start getting it. And then especially for the guys who are like anti-central banking, they might still be in TradFi. Maybe they still haven't gotten into Bitcoin yet, but they're gold bugs. They're anti-establishment, right? They think the financial system's going to collapse. It's corrupt and all that stuff. They come from the era of private bank accounts, numbered bank accounts in Switzerland. Like, they understand the benefit of all those things. And so when you start saying, well, this is what crypto is, the new Switzerland. The numbered accounts from the 70s, that's what crypto is now. And they start getting that. And the fact that Thorchain can be at the nexus of that, that starts getting their wheels going. They start appreciating it. And as far as like a Bitcoiner, maybe they're not necessarily maxi. Maybe they're just only done Bitcoin. But even with maxis, I've had a few maxis now buy Rune. And I'm not like harping on, I'm not like pushing them. It's, it's like talking to a maxi. Like, there's no
change in their mind.
Exactly, right? But, we become friends over time, and we're talking, and they know what I do, and they just get more curious. And they're like, wow, wait a second. Rune is actually, it's not a shitcoin. Like, it's actually doing something. Like, and then, so one guy told me the other day, he's like, yeah, I bought some Rune. I'm like, holy smokes, really? Like, so it's actually quite shocked. And so I think it's just information. Once people understand Thorchain better, they get sold on it.
Yeah, I've found a very similar thing where it's like, it almost sounds too good to be true at first, and you're talking about it and you're explaining it, and you're like, oh, well, that's cool in theory, and all coins are the same. But I do feel like once you start showing them, a big thing for me has been like showing people the swap volume and the growth of, the chain in general, like in terms of actual like hardline statistics, has been a great way to convince people to get more deeply involved. How did the initial process of, setting up, like, let's say setting up your first node and kind of getting into, the more technical side of things, how was that process for you? And how has that kind of evolved as you've obviously grown to operating more nodes and helping people become bond providers?
So I personally am not running the node. I've got a team I'm working with. I'm working with Liquify, and so one of the humans there, he's running the node. So we're working together, and for me that was huge, because I'm like, I'm sure I could figure it out. I'm not a dumb guy, but I'm also not a developer, right? I'm an engineer. I'm a mechanical petroleum engineer. I'm not a computer software engineer, right? And so I wanted to work with somebody that runs nodes for a living, basically, right? Eats, breathes, and sleeps this stuff. And so I partnered with the guys at Liquify. So we're working together on it, and that's been great, because they got servers all over the world, data centers all over the world, multiple redundancies. They're doxed. So for my fun, someone I want to deal with, like, believe me, I 100% understand the benefits of privacy and staying anon. But for me, if Thorchain is really going to be $100 billion protocol, like, some people have to be doxxed. Like, there's no way you're going to raise $10 million from a family institution if everybody's anon, right? So that was, part of it, that I want to work with some people that are okay and happy with being doxxed, so we can grow. We can attract more capital.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. And when it comes to especially those outsiders, like they look at something like Bitcoin, and they're like, well, who founded it? And then you talk about Satoshi, and their mind just like they want nothing to do with it. So I definitely agree with you that it's good to have decentralization, and you need some people that are anon and some that aren't. But kind of having the mixture of the two definitely helps a lot. When we first started talking, you mentioned a few things about how bonds have been going lately, and how we've kind of reached peak nodes in terms of number. So how has that kind of looked like from a kind of global number standpoint? Like, I know we kind of went from we were kind of trending towards underbonded, right? And then a lot of people started bonding more, and then there was the change to the incentive pendulum. So how has that kind of progressed from, like, obviously the network going from overbonded to being underbonded, and where we are today?
Yeah, so late last year we're overbonded, and a big factor of that is the rune price. The higher the rune price, the more overbonded we are. And then the last 3 months have been brutal for crypto, and then obviously the default on Thorchain with Thorfi, and it's pretty easy to blame rune's price action on the Thorfi default, but I feel pretty strongly, if, let's say, that never happened, everything was honky dory with Thorchain, rune is still around $2. And when crypto is in like a bad market, when Thorchain is down, usually hangs around the number 80 market cap on coinmarketcap.com. And if so, we're going to be about $2 if that trend held. So right now we're just over $1. So I'm ascribing the Thorfi default to that extra $1 that we're down. And with the rune price going down so much, that pushes us into being underbonded. And then with the Thorfi default and the Bybit stuff, we had a lot of nodes leave and bond providers leave the network. So not only is the rune price going down, we're having actual nodes and bonded rune exit. So it's a double whammy. So that's why. So the rune price hasn't recovered, but we have recovered like a lot of those nodes and bonded Rune back to where we were in December. So from that standpoint, we've been doing great. We just need the price now to recover and cooperate. So if the price can get back up to a few several bucks, we should be way over bonded again.
Yeah, that's, and obviously I think a lot of people have talked about, Rune price reflexivity, and how some things are a little bit too reliant on others. Do you have any thoughts about reflexivity and how it's affecting Rune right now? And I know that there's kind of like what you're saying is like there's a positive effect to it, which is a lot of people are bonding right now while Rune is cheap, and then provided the Rune price goes up, say a month, 2 months, 3 months from now, then the network will be even more secure. Are you a fan of the current, reflexivity, or do you think anything needs to be changed at like a protocol level, or is it more just get more people involved in bonding, which I know you're doing?
I might be misunderstanding your idea of reflexivity, but I would argue that a lot of it's gone now, right? That was Thorfi introduced reflexivity, and by the default, we've removed the reflexivity. So I would argue the reflexivity is actually less now going forward. So it's less of a concern for me. But I don't know if I may be understanding you right, if that's the kind of reflexivity.
Yeah, no,
and
I'm just pulling questions also from what I see, like in kind of normie, or at least like people who are in crypto but aren't in Thorchain necessarily, or like bystanders, that one of the things they see with Thorfi and other things, like if you try to use like a more normie lens of someone who's not in this stuff, they see what happened with Thorfi, they see what happened with the Rune price, and they're thinking, well, all these issues are just Rune price related, and if price doesn't go up, then Thorchain doesn't succeed. So I'm more just kind of tackling those kind of broader questions that people tend to have.
So yeah, well, and it is still a concern in the community in general, right? Reflexivity in the price and the design, and this is why we're all basically, we can't use Rune as collateral. That's what introduces reflexivity. So like with Apple Air coming out, like we don't want to have like bond units or LP units or Rune be exported to be used as collateral for people to borrow against, because that introduces reflexivity into the Rune price, and that's where we can get a down move in the Rune price, which reduces the security, reduces the liquidity, reduces the volume, reduces the fees, and that's when you get that downward cycle. So the key here going forward is never ever using Rune as collateral for anything, period. And if there's any silver lining to the whole Thorfi default, is that we learned that lesson early and young. It's like make mistakes while you're young, so you don't make them when you're older. And we made this mistake in Thorchain's early life, because that's the one thing with Rune, is that the token has utility. It's needed. It's intrinsic in how the protocol works. But it's also like there's never been a design like this before. So we're all kind of learning, and what we've learned, because Rune is used to secure, the token is used to secure the network, it can't be used as collateral elsewhere. And that's when you introduce reflexivity. So me, myself, and some others, we're going to fight if it ever comes up where people like, hey, we want to introduce this new feature. If it has any hint of Rune being used as collateral, we're all going to fight it. And so for anyone new to Rune, or is taking a deeper dive to understand, hopefully that gives them some comfort that we learned that lesson early. We were paying the price for it. And we currently, anyway, nobody has any interest in making that same mistake over again.
Yeah, and one thing I've always appreciated, about Thorchain, we talked a little bit about this pre-show, is that it is fast moving and willing to try things and willing to experiment with things, as an ecosystem, as a protocol, as a community, and I think that's a really great thing. I mean, you look at other protocols out there, and there's things like Uniswap, et cetera, that don't really innovate a whole lot. they just tend to be really entrenched because they're so old, and they got that first mover advantage. But one thing I've always really appreciated about the cross chain space is just this willingness to like look at new ideas and try new ideas and experiment with things. And you mentioned the app layer a little bit. What is your view on the app layer and what that means for Thorchain going forward? Is that going to create kind of a nice little sandbox where some of these things can be experimented with, but not affect the core protocol layer? Because as someone that's invested in Rune for a long time, I've looked at Thorchain as being like that. What it should be, at least, is the bulletproof base layer, kind of like how Bitcoin is like the digital gold argument. The base layer barely changes. It focuses on doing what it's really good at, which in Thorchain's case is seamlessly moving assets across chains and providing that security. How do you view the app layer, and do you think it will introduce the ability to sandbox some of these ideas without affecting the base layer?
Yeah, I think so, because and just we're doing a space with JP to talk about app layer later today for anyone interested, and help explain it too to people, because I have to admit I'm still learning. I think a lot of us are, and we're still trying to wrap our heads around it. What I like about it, the best explanation I've got, is that it's basically the app layer can't do anything different on Thorchain than what an individual with a Rune address can do. It's basically just creating a smart contract around a Rune address to go interact with Thorchain. So that part of it, I think, was a really good explanation, and it really helps clarify that there's no risk, right? Like, it's no different than app layer can't do anything different than what you and I can do with our existing Rune addresses, right? So I'm actually pretty excited. I think it's pretty cool. Like, especially if they can get perps, if they can figure out futures trading, like that's going to be huge. And all these other ideas I see throwing around, they seem endless. Like, it seems really cool. But my concern is what if they really do work, and they just it starts exploding and taking off, and then there's a huge pressure to scale that. And the hang up with Thorchain is we have to have some kind of security, some way to secure all those external assets, the Bitcoin and Ethereum and whatnot. And that sparked a huge debate a few weeks ago about changing the security model of Thorchain. So that's actually my bigger concern, is that app layer is a tremendous success, and then there's tremendous pressure to keep it going, and that we might start like getting soft, reducing the security standpoint of things, because we're all drunk with making money. And I'm trying to be open-minded and think about different ways. How do we, how can we scale? How can we grow? Like, in theory, how can we get unlimited growth on Thorchain, but safely, without users having to worry about losing their funds? So that's probably a conversation for a whole other space. But that'd be my main concerns. How do we properly scale it?
Yeah, well, and I'd love to dig into that a little bit, because I think when you the title of the space is Thorchain Bonds, which I think naturally implies that a lot of this discussion is about security and kind of the future of the protocol. So if we dive into a little bit, there's been like this big conversation about, well, we need to increase the bond so that the app layer has room to grow. Do you want to kind of give people a brief overview of why people were saying that, and what impact growing the bond actually has on scaling the app layer, at least initially?
Sure. So I might confuse some people. I'll try my best not to. So this whole conversation started about, 6 weeks ago, when we were underbonded, and there's underbonded, meaning you couldn't deposit any more new crypto onto Thorchain, which meant when app layer, if app layer were to launch in that moment, nobody could use it, because you couldn't put any Bitcoin or Ethereum on it, because there's no room for Thorchain to hold those assets. And so the reason Thorchain has a limit on the dollar amount crypto it's willing to hold based on the dollar value of bond it has. And the idea there is that the people who hold the keys to that crypto, people that hold the keys to the Bitcoin and Ethereum that the users deposit, have more money to lose through their Rune bond than what they would gain from stealing from the Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so there's talk about, let's just remove that limitation altogether. Let's not have a cap. Let's let people want to put $1 billion of Bitcoin on a Thorchain. Let's let them do it. And then nodes might only have 100 million Rune bonded versus the 1 billion in crypto. And the argument for that case was that the nodes will be making more than enough in fees, and that'll be their reason they don't want to steal. Plus, it'll be hard. It's hard to coordinate enough nodes to steal. And I do understand that point of view, and that might be true today. But what if the nodes, the operators change? Or what if those humans go through some life events over the next few years? They make some bad investments, they go through divorce, whatever, and they get desperate. People change, right? So the whole point of having that, particularly the nodes in theory, have more to lose than gain from stealing. So I kind of made the case, well, let's at least try to increase the bond. Let's at least try to get more room, like make more room naturally without sacrificing our ideals, without sacrificing the design. Like at least attempt, at least try, right? And no matter what anybody thinks how Thorchain's security posture should be, every single scenario benefits from more nodes, more node operators, and more Rune bonded. Like every possible scenario benefits. So really, this raise the bond campaign should never end. It should go on forever. It should be anybody who holds Rune should automatically think about bonding their Rune. It should always be the case. We always want as many nodes, as many node operators, and much Rune in the network to make it more secure. So that's where the campaign started. Like, at least let's try and get that going. And but I think it is still, like, right now the security is pretty strict. So the security cap is based on the bottom 2/3 of Rune bonded, and I think it's going to go to all 100% of the Rune bonded. So that'll open up a lot of room for app layer, but still only like, forgive my math, so I might be wrong, but I'm thinking like 10, 20, 30 million, 40 million type thing. But still that'd be enough to start, but it's obviously not enough to grow huge. And that was a security limit when Thorchain first launched. So it was already like that in the beginning, and then was changed to the bottom 2/3 to be more strict, which I always thought was a bit, I understood the reasoning, but it is pretty strict. I think there's some wiggle room. Maybe we could even go to 2 times. So if we have 100 million Rune bonded, maybe we can open the caps to 200 million in crypto. It's kind of like it's like kind of like cheating on your partner. Are you gonna do it in your hometown with the girl who's a 5, or are you gonna do it when you're overseas and with a girl who's a 10, right? So it's like opportunity, right? So if there's much more money to steal, there's much more incentive for somebody to do it. So that's kind of why I'm against removing the hard cap altogether. But I'm sure we can let it go a little bit, and at some point it's still not viable for somebody to steal, especially right now. Like, let's say a few nodes got together and there's only 50 million crypto in the pools. If 10 people stole that, it's 5 million each. You get to launder it. What's that? 25%. So you're getting under 4 million each. Like, it's not worth the headache. But add a few zeros to that, it starts becoming worth the headache. So we gotta play with some things. This is another advantage of nodes being doxed, is that we provide some kind of legal security, in that Like if my nodes are ever responsible for stealing, I mean, God, people be knocking down my doors in a heartbeat. Like I can't, they'd catch me in a second, right? And so this is part of the security is that node operators that have multiple nodes, if they use the same node address, they get split evenly between the vaults. And so it's a way to like say, hey, listen, we're trying to help the network, and we're trying to make it harder for ourselves to steal by using the same node address and getting split between the vaults. So I think I'm kind of rambling on a bit of tangents here, but there are ways we can maybe logically, pragmatically justify why the network is safe and why we can go over our self-imposed dollar hard cap. Other ways to justify and prove that the network is secure.
Yeah, well, and a question came up in my mind when you were talking, which is for someone that doesn't understand, how nodes work, how bonds work, how slashing works. What is stopping a couple of node operators from coming together and saying, hey, let's steal what's in the vaults?
So in theory, is that they don't want to lose the rune that they have bonded on their node, right? That rune would go to zero, would get slashed, would get taken from the node. Like the protocol would take it as a penalty, and or the market everybody would dump their rune, the rune price would go to zero. And so in theory, those node operators have a relationship with those bond providers. And so like the two are one, right? So so even if that node operator doesn't him individually own any rune, in theory, his bond providers are an extension of himself. And because they have the bond providers and node operator have like a legal relationship, where if the node operator is responsible for any kind of theft, those bond providers can take him to court. Or maybe there's a social relationship where the bond providers, they're friends with the node operator. They know where he lives, right? At least go break his legs or do something. There's some kind of recourse. And so that by extension makes that bonded rune the extension of the node operator. If the bond providers have zero relationship with their node operator, and there's 10 operators like that who have zero relationship with their bond providers, node operators are totally anonymous. The only thing stopping them is trust. That they don't want to. They're good guys. They see, like I said earlier, it's just not worth their while right now. A few $1 million, this isn't worth the head. Why risk going to jail and getting in trouble? A few $100 million maybe now becomes worth their hassle. And so the other thing would just be fees, right? They continue to collect fees, earn fees on running the nodes, and they don't want to, why risk the golden goose? So if the node operators are totally anonymous, it's really just trust, which is in crypto, everybody's learned the hard way. Trust me, bro, doesn't end well. So so the node operator can stay anonymous to the network, can stay anonymous to the developers, can stay anonymous to me and you and other node operators, but they should be known to their bond providers. The bond provider should know who their node operator is, so they have some kind of recourse, some kind of assurance that this guy isn't going to steal from the network, and ultimately the bond providers themselves.
Yeah, and I saw a good question, which is, does it make sense to increase the cap of nodes? Because from my understanding, there's 120 max nodes, right? And why cap it at all? Why not have more nodes?
Yeah, good question. So the cap is arbitrary and was set by the nodes. And the reason was, if we start going over, the network starts getting slower because of the way Thorchain is built on Tendermint, which has a quadratic, forgive me, brain farting on the terms. But basically, as the number of nodes go up, it follows a quadratic equation on the speed of the network. And so 120 was just kind of arbitrarily decided, like that's kind of the inflection point where you start going higher, it starts getting much slower. But there's a lot of work being done right now. it sounds like it'll all be done this year, to make things faster, so that when we go past 120 nodes, we are still following that quadratic equation. But if we start from things being much faster today, we can, how should I say this? If we double the speed of everything today, but then increase the number of nodes where it cuts the speed in half, we're right back to where we started. You following me? So, but to be honest, I'm quite sure we've never actually reached 120 nodes anyway. As far as having the number of like, we actually haven't got to that point yet. So it hasn't become an issue yet. But there is definitely, everybody wants more nodes, more node operators, to really reduce that potential for anybody stealing, even if it is a lot of trust me, bro stuff out there. I do believe a lot of people are honest, don't have an interest to steal. And if we get more and more of those people, it just makes, that's the point of decentralization, right? It's just harder and harder for any bad actors to collude, work together. So
yeah, and I think it's an interesting, kind of game theory, which is that, node operating is a competitive landscape. Like to become a node operator, you have to reach a certain threshold of rune. And if you've accumulated, bought that rune and you're providing, your incentive is already that you hold rune. And you're most likely someone who's a good actor because, you bought that rune in the first place. So it seems to me that unless someone were to completely change their opinion about the protocol, and obviously then have to group together with other people who did the same, or spin up a bunch of nodes and go after it that way, those would be kind of the main security concerns. How do you feel about the minimum entry as let's take it two ways. How do you feel about the minimum entry as a node operator, which is obviously a lot more involved than the minimum entry as a bond provider? I know there's a lot of different services now where you can provide lower bonds. There's a lower minimum in terms of bond providing. Do you feel like the barrier to entry, is kind of where it should be for both of those things, or do you think it could be improved in any ways?
That's a good question. I think the barrier to entry for bond providers is good. There's enough competition. People have different minimums. I think that's fine. People they're asking and been wanting some way to bond more easily. Even somebody with $100 worth of rune. And, it's brought up the conversation about liquid staking tokens and an auto bond feature and all this kind of stuff, where, basically people can just with a click, bond their rune, and with another click, unbond it type thing. I understand that would be great and easy and great user friendly, but what happens is that opens the door to nodes being able to hijack the network. So there does need to be some barrier to entry for new nodes to enter the network, because if they can just go raise all this rune, I'm not worried about somebody buying 70 million in rune and getting nodes in network and stealing crypto or whatever. I don't think that's possible at this stage. But what is possible is you could have a group or a few people spin up nodes, very little, next to no cost for themselves, and go and attract and try and get all this other people's rune. There's 200 million rune sitting out there passively held. And if you make an incredible easy way for people to bond that rune without having any relationship with the node operator, you make it easier for malicious actors to get nodes and get into the network. So I think there does have to be some kind of barrier to entry. And I'm not talking about that trying to be entrenched. It's believe me, I would love to get to 200, 300 nodes, and none of them be mine, right? Because that helps secure my investment, my position. I don't want to run 100 nodes, right? That would make the network more insecure and make my investment weaker. So there has to be some kind of barrier to entry, because it becomes too easy to steal. And it doesn't have to necessarily be stealing the crypto. it could be as simple as jamming up the network. Like, I think a lot of people get hyper focused on, oh, it'll be too hard to get 2/3 of nodes to steal from the pools. Well, there's other ways to hurt Thorchain. Right now in Asgard Vault there's 20 nodes per vault. If you had, all you need is 2/3 of an Asgard Vault to steal from that vault. You only need 14 nodes. What if you got 14 nodes in the one vault? Then you could take. The other thing is, let's say you've got 14, 20 nodes, whatever. You can start just raising havoc, pausing trading, pausing the train, not observing transactions, hamstringing Thorchain. Like what if a competitor what if somebody wasn't interested in actually stealing the crypto, but just crippling Thorchain? Then you'd only need 1/3 the nodes, and you could not participate in authorizing transactions and basically grind Thorchain to a halt. So the crypto would still be there; it wouldn't be stolen, but no trades being done. It's just Thorchain's been neutralized. So there's other ways to wreak havoc and kind of attack Thorchain as opposed to just 2/3 stealing the crypto. So going back to the barrier to entry for nodes, like it is good to have some kind of, the harder it is for nodes to enter, the harder it is for anybody to attack the network.
Yeah. I can appreciate the, having some level of barrier to entry for things like that. In the last 15 minutes of these, I like to take questions from the audience, and I've kind of been pulling them while we've been live. But before we do that, I want to touch on TCY a little bit. What is your overall opinion of TCY? As someone that is deeply invested in Rune and Thorchain.
Well, it's good, but it's like I wish it never existed. It never came to this, right? But for the way everything is gone, I think it's a really good solution. Because basically, we've ended the potential for any more Rune to be printed and sold, and so that's important from Rune holders' perspective and Thorchain's perspective. Now, what about the people who got screwed, right? The ThorFi users, right? The people receiving these TCY tokens. For them, I think it's great. I think how should I make sure I choose my words wisely? I definitely feel their pain, right? I mean, it's gut wrenching, and I'm not saying that they should, have to be, hugging and cheering and celebrating, right? But other than, to avoid going to zero and getting nothing, I think TCY is fantastic for them. And that being said, I actually do think there's a real possibility they can actually make more than what was in theory lost. So as long as, I've talked to some ThorFi users who are like, they need money like now, like I really feel for them, right? They might have to sell their TCY to meet other obligations. But if any of those users actually have a longer time horizon, they don't need money right away, and they can hold, I think it's good for them, because they can actually make more than what they lost. And the way that works is basically if the revenue on Thorchain goes up at a higher percentage than the increase in Bitcoin price, TCY should become worth more than what their original capital was. But I think is a reasonable. It's plausible. I'm not guaranteeing. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it's well within the realm of reason. It's not a crazy suggestion to make. And so from that point of view, is actually, people should be able to get paid back. I think they have a really good chance of at least getting to even. And to be frank, I've even thought about, TCY might be too good of a deal for the ThorFi users, and this kind of led to JP posting and getting everyone all riled up about Thorchain merging with TCY and taking it over at some point. And I understand the reasoning, because it's that 10% of revenue is going to be worth a lot someday. Why have it going to another token when it should be going to Rune holders? But we can't do that. Like, we got to make TCY as difficult as possible to change, because then it will never get fully valued, right? The whole value of TCY is at 10% of revenue into perpetuity. That's what people are going to model. That's what they're going to expect. And if you remove that perpetuity, you remove the value of TCY, and you remove people's abilities to get paid back sooner, or paid back at all. And that's really our goal here. Is we want to the Thorfi default was a real black eye for us. If we can pay everyone back, at least we'll still have to live with it, but at least we go a long way to redeeming ourselves, right? And so the sooner we can pay everyone back, the sooner we redeem ourselves, the sooner we repair our reputation. Like since when in any other default in history people got made whole, especially in like a year or two type thing, right? That's unheard of, right? Like the FTX users took them 2 years to get 10 cents on their dollar, right? So, if it takes us 2 years to give people 100% or 150% on their dollar, we've done something right. So, even though I can see TCY being a very valuable token someday, it's not in Thorchain's interest to try and capture it or take it, because that'll just it'd be almost like another default, right? First we default on the Thorfi guys, then we go default on the TCY owners, right? It's a bad look. It just is not good. And what's cool with TCY, the way it's going to work is that, I'm sorry guys, I'm going based on memory, so I always have to. It's been a while since I've thought about it. I'm pretty sure this is right, but any unclaimed TCY, the yield from that is going to go towards buying TCY and create a constant bid on it. So, and that basically will go into like the reserve, for lack of a better term. And so Thorchain will already be naturally buying TCY off the market. And if we really do want to try and remove the token, that's the way to do it, because then that's fair, it's honest. We're buying it at market prices. So if one day, if in theory, Thorchain's buying the TCY and buys 100% of the supply, great. Then we've naturally acquired it. Everyone is sold voluntarily. That's the perfect end game. If let's say we could only buy back 50%, 60, 70% of the tokens, and there's still a bunch out there, somebody might say, well, let's just clean them up. Let's take the rest. But yeah, but at that point, let's say we capture 70, we've bought back 70% of the tokens. There's still 30% trading. Well, then that's only 3% of the revenue going. I don't think it's worth it to rock the boat like that and piss people off again. So I like to think through the natural buyback, we'll be able to claw back a lot of the supply already naturally. Maybe we increase that, to get more of that supply, right? I think that would be fair, right? We're just buying them on the market. It's no different than any other investor actor buying them. There's nothing wrong with that. But an actual code change, we're doing something without the user's consent, that would not be cool. So I just to summarize, I think we got to try and make TCY as hard as possible to change, to give the market comfort that yield is into perpetuity, and we'll get TCY the highest price and value that it can be.
Yeah. I'm very much with you that I think what Thorchain needs right now is a lot of stability, and it needs, predictability. And a big thing that I like that you mentioned is, users need to feel like things are not happening to them, that things are happening for them, and with their full, consent and eyes wide open. I think is a really important piece of this. And one thing you mentioned too, which is that excess TCY getting bought. What are some, because I'm a big fan of the idea of open market buybacks, where companies do it with stocks all the time. They'll go out and they'll buy outstanding shares, and and it's generally a bullish thing for the entire company. If provide with a lot of other factors, but that all being said, if TCY is getting bought back on the market, I would see that as a much more viable path to the protocol recapturing its own revenue, essentially. Where do you think, like, if that were to happen someday, and obviously this is all happening like theoretically, and it's all on the open market. I think the critical distinction is there's no change happening where, okay, now your TCY belongs back to the protocol. It's you went out and you sold your TCY and the protocol just bought it from you, because that's how an open market buyback would work. What might that look like, in the long run, and how does it affect, Rune and TCY? And I think that could also, if you want to take that as a second part question, how do you view Rune and TCY's place in the marketplace?
Yeah, so let me answer your first question. So I guess in theory, what we could do is, kind of like we have a burn mechanism on Rune, where 5% of the revenue of that Rune is burned. We could do something similar. We could start like another 5% goes towards buying TCY, and we just burn the TCY. And it's all being bought on the open market. Maybe we could design it in such a way that we're only buying TCY at certain valuations. Try and buy it cheap, basically, and that'd be totally fair and totally honest. So that's I think that is something we could entertain at some point. As far as Rune and TCY existing together, so basically Thorchain's valuation now we have two components, right? If you're looking at the market cap of Thorchain, you have to look at the market cap of Rune plus market cap of TCY, right? That's going to be its total valuation. So we're going to have, definitely there will be money that would rather buy TCY than Rune. That's the cost we're paying for Thorfi, right? And that's just how it's going to go. But in theory, if TCY only has a claim to 10% of the revenue, and Rune has claimed to 90% of the revenues, then if Thorchain had a $2 billion valuation, and those ratios held, that means TCY would have a 200 million market cap, and Rune would have a 1.8 billion market cap. And to put that into there's a reason I use that number, because that was Thorchain's market cap back in December. So and if TCY had a 200 million market cap, that means TCY is $1, which means people are now even or made whole based on the dollar value of their holdings in January. I understand if TCY goes to $1, they still might be made whole in Bitcoin terms, but that's up to the user to figure out that math. But the point I'm trying to make is, in theory, TCY is always going to be 10% of the market cap of Thorchain in total. Maybe it'll be higher. The one I could see, the one thing with TCY is that it's an easy way for people to get yield. Like, they don't have to bond their Rune, they don't have to be in a liquidity pool. So I'm actually expecting the yield on TCY, the percentage, to be less than the yields we see on the nodes. Because in theory, if the TCY yield is higher than nodes, you should exit the node and sell your Rune to buy TCY, because you'll get more Rune yield from TCY. And then you add in the fact that TCY is liquid, right? You don't have to unbond it or anything like that. It's just it's easy to sell. Liquidity. When an asset has better liquidity, it trades at higher valuations. So in my opinion, long term, I think we're going to see TCY consistently trade at lower percentage yields than the yield we see on the nodes. And we might even see some people going back and forth between the two. Could be some interesting trading going on there. But I think, after the next, once it's live for 6 months, a year, I think it'll settle out pretty evenly. and I think the two will just trade lockstep with each other. And yeah, if we, like I said, if TCY does turn out to be too good of a deal, and that people get paid back right away and they make more money, great. Then maybe Thorchain can look at rebuying some of those tokens on the open market, start burning them, start removing that, start getting that revenue back to itself. So I think overall, I think it's good. I think it's a really elegant solution to an ugly problem.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with all of that. We got like 2 minutes left, and I know we got a hard stop, so I'll just give you one question from the audience, from Ahmad Manga, which is, we were talking about rune bonding, and he said should everyone who holds rune consider bonding it? If you're holding any rune in your wallet, and you're just an average user, should everybody go out and bond that rune?
Yeah, 100%. Because especially if you're just like holding, like waiting, I'm going to wait for it to go to $2, $5, whatever your target is. Absolutely. If you're day trading it, I get it. If you don't bond, you need to stay liquid. If you need to sell in a month because for whatever reason, don't bond. Stay liquid. But if you're like buying and holding for the next year or two type thing, absolutely. And not only are you getting the yield, like you're getting paid to wait basically, but you're becoming an agent in your own success. You're helping secure the network. You're helping increase the security, which encourages more volume, more liquidity, more trading, more revenue for Thorchain, which drives up the rune price. Like you're actively helping yourself. Yeah, you're doing your little part. It's kind of like you've heard like your vote doesn't count. In this case, it does. Like every single rune we get bonded improves the chances of rune going up in price, because we encourage more volume, more trading activity. So remember, going back to being under bonded, we didn't have enough rune, so it means we can't grow, we can't get more volume, we can't get more users. So yeah, it should always be first in mind, first thing people think about.
Cool. Yeah, I love that. And you said something that I think is a great way to leave the people with, just a great idea in general, especially with Thorchain, which is become an agent in your own success. I really love that tagline, to tell people why they should bond rune. Ken, thanks for doing this. And do you want to send the people anywhere to keep up with you and all the things that you're doing?
You can follow me on Twitter, at Kenton C137. Usurecrypto.com is our website. I've actually got an email newsletter there if you want to sign up for it.
Cool.
That's it.
Well, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Yep. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.